So biases have a way on creeping up on us. We sometimes find ourselves making decisions based on emotions, what we feel, as opposed to the truth or fact. So when it comes to making decisions in terms of your investments, are there any common biases that we need to be aware of? And is it actually possible to be unbiased while making an investment decision? While we have our resident behavioral economist, Amy Jansen, who joins us from Johannesburg. She's done extensive work when it comes to this particular topic. She has a master's from Cambridge. She's a CFA charter holder, has been in the industry for 12 years, and she's currently also completing her PhD. Amy, so excited to have you on board today and listen to what you have to say. I'm going to be handing over to you.
Hello, it's great to be with you today to talk about being blissfully biased. Why is it inevitable and what can you do about it, especially as someone who makes high stakes decisions on a regular basis? This can be particularly pernicious because if you're making regular high stakes decisions, there are ways that biases can creep in more easily, and that's what we're going to look at today. But first, let's understand what a bias is. A bias is a pattern that we repeatedly follow, and if it is inappropriate, it can lead to mistakes consistently in the same direction. So let's start with some examples that are very common in the corporate environment. The first of these is hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is this tendency to believe things about what our past self knew. So to picture this, consider a boardroom. You're sitting around making a decision. There are some people who are on the fence. There's a couple of people who are complete naysayers. And then there's the guys who are super confident. This is the way forward. We must do this. You make the decision. 6 months later, you have a lot more information about whether it was the correct decision or not. Now, in everyone's mind, when they look back on that past decision, they were much more confident of the direction it would go. If the decision has turned out well, everyone knew it would. And if it has turned out badly, I always knew it wasn't going to work. This is an example of imposing into the past information that we have in the present, which makes us have a bias in terms of our belief around how much we actually knew at various points when we made decisions previously. Another one that shows up in corporate boardrooms a lot is what we call sunk cost bias. Sunk cost bias is particularly dangerous in a corporate environment. It's when we've already made a decision, invested money in it, invested resources in it, time, energy, effort, all of these things. And so when we have to make another decision about the same issue to make a further investment, even when it's starting to look like maybe we didn't make the right decision in the first place, because of how much we've already invested in it, we're more likely to continue going in the same direction, even though the original costs may no longer be relevant. Sunk cost bias is a particularly interesting one because it is rooted in a much deeper and more prevalent bias known as loss aversion. Loss aversion is one of the most famous biases, and it talks about the fact that generally people invest as much effort in preventing, or twice as much effort in preventing a loss than getting an equivalent gain. So let's make that a little bit more tangible. That means someone will put in as much effort in preventing a 100,000 Rand loss than they would a 200,000 Rand gain. And this is, as you can see, can be deeply problematic. But why do we do it? Well, it has a very evolutionary basis. And that is, as you can imagine, when you're a hunter-gatherer and your humans are evolving, you're in an environment with a lot of risk. If you miss the lion, the tiger, or the bear hiding behind the bush, it can kill you. It has high. So as you can imagine, hunter-gatherers that ran around not being careful whether the lions, the tigers, and the bears were hiding in the bush from them tended to die out. And so those of us who are here today are descended from those more cautious hunter-gatherers that were super careful that there weren't lions and tigers and bears hiding behind the bushes. This is the origin of loss aversion, and it demonstrates the fact that biases tend to start somewhere where they're super useful and doing something for us that we really need. But when taken into a completely new context, the modern world versus being a hunter-gatherer, they suddenly no longer work, and they can lead to systematic errors that can take a company under. Now, why are there all these biases? If you've ever looked them up, you'll see that there are thousands. Why are they so prevalent? Why do they seem to come up over and over again? And how can you do something about them without having to learn all of the biases that might exist, which can take a while. So to do that, you need to understand your brain in a new way. So today, I would like you to suspend the belief that you are just one person sitting inside your head, and I'd like you to imagine a company inside your head. You've got 3 layers in your company. At the top, you have the CEO. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is where what we call executive control sits. Executive control is just a fancy science word for self-control, but it's also where your higher cognitive functioning sits. Those analytical skills, that ability to learn and keep on learning, all sits up here in your CEO. Then you have at the bottom what I call the robots. The robots are the part of your brain that are largely unconscious. It's running your digestion, it's running your breathing, it's running your immune system, all sorts of things you really don't have access to. Some of these things you can tweak, and the main one that I want to talk about today is the energy management system, because your robots are determining most of the time whether you're going into fight or flight or rest and digest, which are the decisions of your autonomic nervous system, which sits at the back here. Now, these decisions can be really important because they say how much energy the rest of your brain has available relative to the rest of your body at any point in time. You can tweak this. A cup of coffee can get you a little bit more energy, but a meditation can downscale you a bit. But most of the time, you don't have that much control over it. And energy is critical when it comes to understanding your brain, because the CEO is an energy hog. Your brain is 3% of your mass and 20% of the energy that you consume every day. So when you're eating, 20% of those calories are going up here. So as a result, the middle layer of your brain, who are stars of the show today, is the one that has to protect the CEO at all costs. And as a result, they are responsible for 80% of the decisions you make every day. Yes, I'm talking about your brain's minions. So these minions, we have a very excitable minion on this side. He is very excitable. He looks at anything shiny, new, really high returns. He gets excited. He wants to get involved. This is your loss-averse minion. He's a little bit more grumpy. He's always looking on the downside. And he is the one who's going to try and protect you from anything out there. The problem is, both of these guys can make mistakes. And so you need to be super careful when you're in your minion layer. But your layer is inevitable, because in order to make sure that your CEO is not chewing up too much energy and expending itself, your minions will look for any patterns, anything you do repeatedly, and try to make it habitual. This could be your morning routine, how you drive to work, but it could also be how you make decisions to work. Your minions will be responsible both for the things you master and for the mistakes you make. So if you consider 2 pianists, one is a little girl sitting behind the piano learning to play chopsticks. Her CEO is super active because she's learning, and her minions are trying to figure this whole thing out so they can make it easier for the CEO going forward. A pianist at the top of her game in the New York Philharmonic, she's in a very different position. Her CEO has to do nothing when she plays. Most of the work is being done by her minions, because her minions have done this so many times that they have optimized and perfected it. So it's not about despising your minions. They're here to help, but they can also be where all the biases come from. These repeated patterns that go from being in an appropriate place where they're a useful shortcut to being somewhere inappropriate, where suddenly they lead you into making repeated mistakes, which is what we call a bias.
Briefly, because you're making some very important points and want to ensure that we understand everything that we're saying. So maybe just to get a quick summary from you. You speak about 3 layers. So you've got your CEO, who's the energy hungry one. You've got the robot that does all of the functions that we're not always even aware of. And then you've got your minion layer, which you've explained. Now that you've explained these layers, how do we as investors, practically apply what you're talking about? I mean, how does this now fit into your investment decision? Because do we need to now be looking at investment purely from the minion layer or diverted to the CEO? How does this work?
That's exactly what we want to look at right now. So how do we manage our CEO and minions when we're thinking cash management and investments? Well, the first thing to understand is often your impulse is to go, well, I want everything to go to my CEO. He's the smart one. I want him to manage everything. And hopefully the example of the pianist has given you a sense that this is probably not optimal. if you're doing something repeatedly, you want it to be in your minion layer, but you want to get the most out of it. So the key thing is if you are making repeated high stakes decisions, so they could be about cash and returns, they could be about foreign exchange rates, it could be about a range of these different things. What you want to do is look at what are your minions doing? How are you looking at the information when you get it? What are the shortcuts? What are the checklists that you are using mentally in your brain, and are they the ones that you would like to be using? This is one of the best uses of your CEO. You can use it when you're making New Year's resolutions. Don't spend all the time with your CEO trying to have self-control and get to the gym. Use your CEO to come up with tricks and tips for your minions to make it easy for them to get to the gym. And it's the same with cash management. So if we take an example, for instance, a ritual that can be super useful and get great returns is something like cash sweeping. Cash sweeping is something which can be built really nicely into the end of your day, either your day or someone's in your team. The trick is, for a good ritual, is it's not about going, I'll do that at the end of the day. It must be the last thing you do. By making it the last thing you do, you create a ritual for your minions that know, only turn off the computer once I have done this. Then you can create this ritual of cash sweeping every day, which gets you an enhanced return over the long term. But it's really easy. It's also, if you happen to be working at home, having a ritual for closing out the day will help you switch from work mode to home mode that much more effectively. So that's the first layer. How do you get the most out of your minions? Anything repeated is going to be minionized, so make active choices about the minionization. The second bit is if something is new, novel, unusual, or an area where you need to learn, you need to set your CEO for success. That means do it early in the day, early in the week. The thing that drives me absolutely crazy is when you see executives meeting on a Friday and making high stakes decisions on a Friday afternoon. The minions are going to be the ones making those decisions in all those important people's brains. No one wins in that scenario. If you want to make good high stakes decisions that are novel, you need to put it at the beginning of your agenda. You need to set your CEO up for success. So don't put too many demands on it. Put it early in the day. And the same goes for learning. If there are certain things you want to upskill in your cash space, you want to talk to the cash solutions team, learn a few more detailed things, set up a conversation with them for 30 minutes on a Monday morning, get the most out of your CEO, learn what you need to learn, and then create the rituals for your minions to keep you going forward in the direction you want to go.
Amy, thank you so very much for that. That was some really, really great insights. So I think going forward, especially when it comes to your day-to-day or the management of what you do, is to ensure that you prioritize what you do. So, for example, as you mentioned, making sure that you put your high-stake meetings or all those decision-making will happen earlier on in the day as opposed to later on in the week, etc. Thank you so much for that fascinating discussion that you had with us. Of course, that was Amy Jansen. She is our resident behavioral economist, and she was telling us about what we can do in terms of ensuring that we don't have some of those behavioral biases feed into our investment making decisions, and of course how to optimize our minion layer.